Yes.
Okay. So, good morning. Sorry, not good morning. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first session of Valence. Valence is a public journal club dedicated for chemistry. So, after some of our friends started Biome, the biology public journal club, we thought of starting one for chemistry because, as we can see, the the community around discussion of chemistry in our college is a little bit mm, because it is one. So, okay, so is a, I mean, it's not very good. So we thought that since there are too many interesting fields coming up and new researches are being conducted every day, and chemistry is such a vast topic, so we thought of creating this journal club to discuss and um, create awareness among people about new fields and all. Okay, so today's talk will be given by Sefali Patro, a 17 MS DCS student. The talk is titled Biomimetic Metal Organic Cyclohelicates, Nature-Inspired Way to Biofuels. It might sound a bit complex, but I think um, she will explain it well for you to understand. And let me tell you about the structure of the session. So normally in a PJC, the session is starts with a 30-minute presentation followed by a discussion with the author. But for the first few sessions, we are not inviting the authors because we want to just gauge at the interest of the people, and also most of are not like not well familiar with the the formal structure of PJC. So we are thinking of um, just doing a few sessions with our friends. So we will follow this 30-minute presentation with a discussion, and if anyone has any question, just and if anyone thinks that they want to speak the question after in during the discussion session, then write question in the chat box, and if you um, want to type it out, you can type it out, then I will mediate between the between Sefalidi and you. Okay, so and okay, and I will indicate when you need to start like writing the questions. I think is better not to disturb during the presentation. Okay, so I will hand over to Sefalidi.
Okay. So I will just keep my mic on because if I turn my video on, I think my screen might freeze. I've seen that.
दीदी कुछ सुनाई नहीं दे रहा, जोर से बोलो.
हाँ, थोड़ा.
Hello. Is it audible?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, please be a bit.
दीदी loudly दीदी.
I
No,
don't
no, no.
know
The
why the
voice is
mic is
Please
enough.
don't
freezing.
say.
Acha, please keep it a formal event. Let's start.
Okay. I hope you can hear me. अपना laptop का बढ़ा दो, phone का बढ़ा दो volume. I cannot do anything. Okay. I'll
Thank you
start.
दीदी for the tip.
Okay. Okay. I hope you can see my screen.
It came, it went away. So yeah, you can
Okay.
try once.
Okay.
दीदी चला गया.
I did not even see when it came. अच्छा, I hope you can see it now.
Yes.
दिख रहा है? Cool. Okay, so first off, okay. So, Welcome everyone to the very first discussion session of the Valence Journal Club. So, our talk today is titled Biomimetic Metal Organic Cyclohelicates Nature Inspired Way to Biofuels, or in simpler terms, making fuels in molecular flasks. So, we will start with a very short introduction to the basic idea of the paper, then, we will delve deeper into the concepts involved, and then we will go into the experimental procedure and results and conclusions of the paper. So, first off, we will start with something very tiny, in fact, at the nanoscale. So, let's just imagine a couple of molecules. Now, when you do a reaction in a lab in general, we generally take a few grams of the compounds that we're going to react in some sort of a reaction vessel. But have you ever wondered if we can react just a few molecules in some sort of a confined environment, almost like a nano-sized flask or something? And what might be the utility of this? So this essentially has been called the idea of a molecular flask, where you can just react a few molecules at once. So this paper will show us why this idea is interesting and how a nanoscale concept like this can help us address an issue we face in our own world, which is a pretty important task also, which is fuel production. So while this paper essentially focuses only on hydrogen generation, we will go over the importance of fuel production in general, and we will try to understand the molecular flask concept and how exactly these two are connected together. So after this, we start with the general overview of the concepts involved. So first I raise the question as to why we're interested in hydrogen generation at all. So to answer this, I would like to start with the idea of a global energy crisis, which essentially refers to the impending danger we face if the existing energy resources we have right now run out due to our ever increasing energy needs in the modern world. Why do I say so? Because presently we depend extremely on non renewable sources of energy, even so with the increasing time since the industrial revolution, such as natural gas and oil, whereas our global energy demand as of 2016 stands at 16 terawatts a year, and it's set to multiply by a few times by the end of this century. And obviously non-renewable sources of energy are set to run out if we keep increasing our needs, but they are not replenished. And secondly, the issue is that carbon dioxide emissions, which happen due to the combustion and usage of fossil fuels, are set to increase to extremely dangerous levels if we don't do anything. Because even at the present moment, the carbon dioxide levels in the air are at more than 50% of what they were in the pre industrial era. So, obviously, we need a greener, cleaner alternative source of energy. And obviously, there have been thoughts about this, and probably the best solution for it is to harness solar energy. Not only because it's inexhaustible, but also because we receive something like 100,000 terawatts of solar energy per year on our planet. And if you run a quick calculation, you will see that per hour, the solar energy that is incident on Earth is nearly sufficient to satisfy our global energy needs for one whole year if we capture that solar energy completely. So this is essentially the idea of photovoltaic devices, which we see in our daily life, such as solar cells, solar panels, which essentially have sunlight being incident on the solar cell device, and that mobilizes electrons, leading to an electric current. So essentially, you are converting solar energy to electricity. But here also, there is plenty of room for improvement. First of all, the solar cell efficiency depends on the sunlight intensity in that particular area where it is installed. And also, the production and installation of solar cells is often costly, so we could look for cheaper options. And more importantly, there has been recently the thought that could we possibly generate energy from solar energy sources, which we could store for usage later, basically like a fuel, instead of simply readily producing electricity as we do in photovoltaics generally. So, this has led to researchers devising the concept of a solar fuel, which essentially means that you use solar energy to create certain substances that can store the energy in form of, say, certain chemical bonds maybe, which you can later on break down to release some energy so that it can be used later on. And to produce solar fuels, if I look for a raw material, then what quality should it have? It should ideally be plentifully available in the environment. For example, it could be water, so that it's not non-renewable like oil or natural gas, and it should be able to be made in an eco-friendly process, and it should be generally a simple and feasible mechanism so that the logistics involved are not costly or difficult to achieve. So from this, I would like to ask if you can, if it rings a bell about a process that you in general have seen around you and it checks these boxes. Some of you may have understood it when I said the raw material is water. So it is none other than the natural process of photosynthesis, which essentially takes plentifully available raw materials such as carbon dioxide and water and converts it with in the presence of sunlight into oxygen, which is a non-polluting byproduct, and energy filled molecules such as carbohydrates, which essentially serve as the food for the photosynthetic organisms. Taking a closer look, we see that water is split in this reaction. With concomitant production of oxygen, we also have protons and electrons being produced in the reaction, which go ahead in the biochemical pathway to eventually reduce carbon dioxide into carbohydrate molecules, which are represented as CH2ON. And with this essentially means energy storage for the future, because these molecules, when they are broken down during the respiration process, it eventually gives back these initial components and releases a bunch of energy, which you can relate to even the combustion of any organic fuel molecule, uh, such as a hydrocarbon, which again gives you the initial components, carbon dioxide and water. So this seems to make photosynthesis appear like the dream process that we can emulate to produce solar fuels and address our energy concerns. But the real question is, can we actually mimic photosynthesis? Is it very feasible? So this is exactly the question addressed by a field in science known as artificial photosynthesis. To know what this is, we will start with a rough schematic of the natural photosynthesis process, which is actually pretty complicated. So for our purposes here, we will just look at the rough machinery. So there are two photosystems involved, which we can look at as simply photosensitive molecules, which means they absorb light at a certain wavelength, and they can get excited to a excited state from where they can undergo a chemical process such as electron transfer. So if I imagine the conversion of water into oxygen by an oxygen evolving catalyst, then the electrons produced in the process, as we saw, can be transferred to the excited photosystem or photosensitizer, let's say. And from there on, the electrons can follow a long electron transport chain pathway mediated by several proteins, and they can be transferred to another excited photosystem, from where on the process can be repeated, and the electrons can reach a reductase enzyme, which can reduce biomolecules such as NADP plus to NADPH, and these can later on go on in biochemical pathways such as Calvin cycle to reduce carbon dioxide to products like carbohydrates. So if I were to think of an artificial photosynthesis scheme which emulates this, I would still like water to be converted to oxygen, basically the non-polluting byproduct, in a by a water oxidation catalyst or WOC, and this could release electrons, which could go ahead to a photosensitizer, which on excitation can transfer these electrons to something called a hydrogen evolution catalyst or something like a carbon dioxide reducing catalyst, which can take protons to hydrogen, or it can make several useful fuels like methanol, methane from carbon dioxide, or we can simply have involved molecules such as sacrificial electron donors, which are essentially molecules whose main purpose is to simply donate electrons to the photosystem, or we can have an electron sink on this side, such as a sacrificial electron acceptor. So it looks complicated, but we will go through the process sort of step by step. So first I have a solar energy source or light energy source, which can be made to fall on the photosensitizer molecule. As we can see, the highest occupied molecular orbital has, say, paired electrons. And after this, on the light energy being incident on it, the electrons can undergo photoexcitation so that one of them enters the LUMO orbital. So we have singly occupied molecular orbitals now. So P star is actually found to be a better reducing agent as well as oxidizing agent than P usually. So the higher energy electron can be easily lost so that it's a pretty good reducing agent, or it can also accept electrons in the lower energy level. So keeping this in mind, if we look at the oxygen evolution component that we saw in natural photosynthesis and in this scheme also, we could begin from P. It could be excited to P star, then an sacrificial electron acceptor maybe could accept an electron to form P plus, and then the water oxidation catalyst could give away electrons to P plus to return it to P. Meanwhile, it gets oxidized, and this it can accept electrons from water, which itself gets oxidized to oxygen. And also, you can propose an alternative mechanism where the process is essentially reversed. You can go from P to P star, and P star first interacts with the water oxidation catalyst, not the acceptor. So essentially, we have a P minus instead of P plus, after which the acceptor interacts, but the result is still the same. You have an oxygen molecule being produced. And similarly, if you think of the hydrogen evolution component, you go from P to P star, and then the HEC can be reduced to HEC minus, and the catalyst can transfer the electrons to proton to reduce it to hydrogen. Then the interaction with donor can return P plus to P. Or similarly, a reverse reaction can happen producing P minus. Now, in an idealized system, I would like both a hydrogen evolving site and a oxygen evolving site with a photosystem involved and all. But okay, and also the mechanism can be reversed, just showing you in case. But in reality, the logistics of developing such a intricate system have been very difficult to achieve, and very few systems exist like this. So generally, researchers have tried to develop systems where you have just one or two components like this. So in this particular paper, the authors have tried to develop a hydrogen evolving catalyst in via the idea of artificial photosynthesis using a certain photosensitizer, to which we will come later. So that addresses the question of why we are trying to create hydrogen. And with this, we come to another question as to why are we using molecular flasks at all. So picture this. We have to trap light energy sort of by an antenna or something, as in a light harvesting complexes exist in photosynthesis system. We can have a we need a photosensitizer molecule. We also need hydrogen and oxygen evolving catalysts or center. Now, with all the cascade of reactions that we saw in the schemes we discussed, we would like all these components to be in appreciable proximity to each other so that the reactions happen smoothly and efficiently. But if we simply imagine dumping them into a reaction vessel, they would be free to move apart from each other. So, how would the process be efficient? And what can we do to realize this? So, we can almost imagine that if there was a nano-sized um, a hole or some sort of a hollow which can hold all of them together at one place and force them to be confined together, maybe the reaction can happen smoothly. This exactly was the idea behind molecular flasks. But the question is, how do we exactly achieve such an assembly? So this essentially is the basic of the supramolecular approach, in which you essentially have a host compound and the guest molecule enters its cavity and stays there by means of some attractive interactions. An example which I can simply put forward is the crown ether, in which you have a carbon-based backbone, in which you have alternating oxygen atoms, where and this acts as the host where the oxygen lone pairs can do ion dipole interactions with a gas such as a potassium ion, so that such non-covalent interactions, when they come up together and unite, they are even stronger than covalent interactions sometimes, though non-covalent interactions themselves are weak in general. And similarly, an example of that sort could be a cryptand, where you have nitrogen and oxygen donors and the structure is a bit more rigid. Or a more complicated covalent framework could be a cucurbitryl, for example. where you have polar amide groups and stuff. But one question you may ask is this really a feasible approach? Because look at the complicated structures involved. Are we really going to be able to synthesize this easily? So the answer is no. The supramolecular synthesis of such stuff is actually challenging and requires specialized conditions, such as a highly dilute solution and all. So instead of that, could we think of a more easy approach? So apparently, these covalent frameworks are not so necessary. Instead, maybe we could go for a metal organic framework, which is mostly constituted by coordinate bonds between metal ion clusters and um, structured by organic linkers or backbones between them. So the bonding is coordinate bonds, and these are specifically oriented in certain ways. For example, tetrahedral geometry or some stuff, because the metal ions and clusters, they sort of prefer those geometries, and hence when you put these two components together, even in a normal reaction vessel, they usually will unite together as if they were jigsaw puzzle pieces. So their assembly is sort of much more easier than we see in a covalent supramolecular compound, for example, crown ethers. So let's look at a few examples of MOFs. So here we can see that the bridging ligands, as we saw, the linkers, could form a cage by orienting themselves around the metal ions, which could be photoactive, or we could have photoactive ligands themselves surrounded by metal ions, or we can have a normal cage, which is simply redox active, but it encapsulates a photosensitive molecule within its cage as the guest. And now, as we saw in the cascade of reactions we discussed, that electron transfer is involved, and as a result of electron transfer you will have a charge separated intermediate, which could be a positive donor after it transfers the electron to an acceptor so that it becomes negative sort of. So in this paper we will see something like this, where the cage and the host compound, and the guest compound, which is basically a photosensitive molecule, are united in a host guest complex such that the guest is encapsulated within the host, and it is a stable charge separated intermediate, because the guest molecule cannot interact with outside molecules, so there is less chances of side reactions, and also the non-covalent interactions between the host and the guest stabilize the whole intermediate. So this dual benefits of MOFs, combined with the general benefits of supramolecular approach, are utilized to form a hydrogen evolving artificial photosynthetic system in this paper. So that's the whole idea basically. Just one more factor that I'd like to discuss is, what if we try to get inspiration from actual enzymes in the nature that do proton reduction, which is our aim here. For example, iron-iron hydrogenase. So indeed, people have tried that. So if we consider a molecule like NADP+, which is an essential redox active molecule, which is often associated with enzymes like hydrogenases, and it has a moiety within it, which can be called a dihydropyridine amido, or DHPA moiety, which is essentially the core of the activity of NADP+, where you can see that if a hydride attacks this part, then by electron pushing you can form NADPH. And this idea has been used by researchers to say reduce compounds like phenanthridine catalytically to form this. And our researchers here have also used a analogous molecule, which is NAD plus, where you essentially lack this phosphate group. And they have postulated that if I use this DHPA moiety in my MOF, then it could possibly improve the efficiency of the light induced electron transfer that we're seeing here, which is the core of our activity, which produces hydrogen in turn. So these are the basic ideas involved in the basic thoughts behind this paper. So with this, we will go ahead and try to understand the experimental procedures. So first off, they tried to design two MOFs, and the first one was called H2ZPB, which was essentially a ligand which contained the DHPA moiety as its core and synthesized in several steps. And this H2ZPB ligand was then reacted with a cobalt metal salt, and thereafter it produced a metal organic framework, which is a red compound, which is COZPB, whose structure is essentially described as a microcyclic helical type of structure, which could be visualized something like this cartoon here. So as they did not include any X-ray diffraction or structural data, we have only this much to go upon. And before we move ahead, there was the photosensitizer used here was fluorescein, which is a fluorescent molecule, and it is used as the guest compound that goes into this host. And after the synthesis, there was a lot of characterization and spectroscopic analysis, which we'll skim through. So ESI MS spectra or mass spectra of this MOF compound gave two major peaks, which were assigned to a CO3 and ligand 3 type of complex, which means you have M3L3 macrocycles, which are stable in aqueous solutions. And as we saw, the three cobalt ions were um, coordinated with three types of ligands, almost like a chelation, as we saw here. Uh, these are being referred to as N2O units. So after this, and also the organization, the configuration was defined as sort of meridional. And the interesting part is when you add the supposed guest compound, then you see there is a new peak at this position, which was assigned to the system where you have one host compound encapsulating one guest compound. And the stoichiometric ratio was supposed to be 1:1. So this was what was supposed to be happening, like the host guest complexation is happening. To further gain evidence for this, they performed an NMR spectra, so a spectroscopy in which they once again saw that if you add the guest compound, supposed guest compound, the NMR spectrum of the host completely changes with several significant shifts. And this was once again found to be suggestive of an encapsulation happening. And similarly, they did some UV spectroscopy, in which they saw that you initially have the host compounds spectrum in this bottommost curve, but when you add fluorescein, the absorption increases significantly at this one wavelength, which is 510 nanometers, and goes up by a significant amount as you add more and more fluorescein. And when they uh, when they did sort of a titration, in which I am not sure I understand the exact details, but I'll try to um, try to give you a simple idea, where they sort of plotted the normalized sort of an absorbance, and they kept adding to a fixed amount of I guess the host compound, the guest compound, and they saw what sort of a stoichiometric ratio was achieved if there was a host guest complexation happening, as seemed to be happening from this curve. Because of a radical change in the UV spectra, they expected a host guest complexation to be happening, and it appeared that there was once again this 1:1 stoichiometric ratio which was visible. And they also calculated a certain association constant for this complex. And as the core of this proton reduction is the photoinduced electron transfer processes, as it is called, it is important to understand the redox properties of the host compound, for which they did a cyclic voltammogram experiment. We will not go into the details of that for this, but for our purposes, we can understand that when we have a redox reaction happening essentially in the system, then this can give you an idea of whether what sort of a reaction is happening and at what potential. So they saw that there was a broad peak at minus 0.88 volt, and that was assigned to mostly the reduction of the cobalt 2 in the host to cobalt 1, and sort of an overlap with the involvement of DHP, I guess. And when they made the environment more and more acidic, they added more and more protons to see whether hydrogen evolution is happening, the reaction is happening or not. They actually saw an increase in current, suggesting some sort of a electron transfer reaction is happening significantly. The potential shifted more towards right to the more negative side, and the this sort of suggested that actually the host compound is involved in some sort of a proton reduction um, reaction, because as we are increasing the proton content of the system, the this change is happening with increasing current and rightward shift. And one more check they did was whether the guest compound is actually involved in the reaction or not. So they tried to see what happens if I add the host compound in increasing amounts to a set amount of the fluorescent guest. As we know, it is fluorescent, which means if we have the photosensitizer, which is fluorescent here, going to an excited state sort of, then if it returns from the excited state to the ground state, in simple terms, that would be considered a fluorescent emission basically. But as we can see, we have postulated that the guest compound would actually be involved in some sort of a reaction with the catalyst or the donor, and hence the excited state population might not be completely returning to the ground state. So as expected, the if we plot the observed fluorescence with the initial fluorescent intensity which we observed for simply fluorescent in the system with nothing else, then we see that the as we add more and more COs at PB, then the fluorescence intensity is decreasing, and that was supposed to imply that the excited state is actually involved in reducing our cobalt 2, which is the HEC, the MOF basically, to CO1, and it's going to P plus, so it's not exactly returning directly to the ground state. So we are seeing some sort of a reduction in the fluorescent intensity. And finally, okay, we come to the most crucial part of the experiment, which is how hydrogen is getting evolved and if it's happening or not. So first off, the three main components that we saw: the photosensitizer, fluorescein, the MOFCOZPB, and what they used as the sacrificial part of this was the triethylamine and also the proton source basically was used to and the GC was used to record the volume of the hydrogen evolved, and they saw that at around 11 pH the hydrogen evolution had peaked, and the turnover frequency, which is basically the number of molecules of substrate converted to the product per by a time unit, basically here per mole catalyst an hour, and TON, which is turnover number, which is simply the conversion per mole of the catalyst, were found to be 100 and 400 respectively. And another important part was that the molar ratio of 1 is to 1, which we observed initially, seemed to be preferred here for optimal performance. So at 1 is to 1, the hydrogen production seemed to be peaking, and if the fluorescent seemed to be in excess, then there was not much increase in the hydrogen production, and if the host was in excess, then actually the hydrogen production seemed to be decreasing. So and one final check they did with the system was whether um, the host guest activity is actually the core reason for hydrogen evolution. So when you have fluorescent as guest and it enters the cavity, then we are supposed to be seeing hydrogen production, but we don't know if host guest activity is actually the reason. So to inspect this, they took a molecule like adenosine triphosphate as the guest, which is not supposed to be having any particular interactions or reactions as we thought of, and that would lead to proton reduction and hydrogen evolution eventually. And as expected, it was found to be inactive to hydrogen evolution. And this is seen in this bar graph here, where if you have simply fluorescein, then its fluorescence intensity is, if normalized, then it's 100% or 1. So if we add just COZPB in the system of fluorescent, then there is a drastic increase from 1 to something like zero point 0.1 or something. But if you also add ATP in the system, then the fluorescence intensity is actually increasing, which means several of the catalytic sites are occupied by ATP, and it acts almost like an inhibitor, where fluorescent could have gone in and produced hydrogen. That is not happening. So fluorescent is actually showing more intensity in this case. So apparently, the host guest activity was found to be crucial for hydrogen evolution. And after this, we come to the second part of the experiment that the authors tried. to actually investigate if their idea that the DHPA moiety should be included based on the inspiration of NADH model, what happens if it's absent? Do we see any significant changes? And do we really need to be following an NADH model? So to inspect this, they designed a different type of ligand where they deleted the pyridine core, basically DHPA core, and replaced it with a simply a benzene ring system. And after this, they ran through the same process. Basically, we add a cobalt salt and we end up with a MOF, which they call COQDB, which is basically a very similar structure. It's black in color, and for this, they included the single crystal XRD data, so we can actually look at the uh, supposed structure of this microcycle, which is once again sort of helical, and if you look at the details, it was found to be having sort of a rotational C3 symmetry, and there was an alternating arrangement of the metallands and the ligands one after the other, and once again a helical microcycle, and also these bond lengths such as CO were found to be between single and double bond lengths, which suggested that there was a lot of delocalization within the system, which could imply more stability. And also they found four counteranon which from which they suggested that these two amide groups might be deprotonated within the MOF. And after understanding the structure, once again spectroscopic analysis were run. So we found three major peaks in the mass spectra, which were assigned to metal ligand association of M3 is to 3 ratio, basically an M3L3 system, just like COZPB. And this was also found to be stable in aqueous solution. And once again, a very similar effect when you add the supposed guest. That, but one major difference was that the host compound, one host compound sort of encapsulated only half of the guest, which means you need two of the COQDB molecules basically to encapsulate one fluorescent guest. And this suggested once again that there is a different type of ratio, but there is host guest complexation happening, and the stoichiometric ratio in this case is 2 is to 1. So once again, the NMR spectrum was pretty different for COQDB and the supposedly complexed QDB with the fluorescent guest, which once again suggested host guest activity happening. And once again, in a UV spectra experiment, there was a drastic difference in the initial host UV spectrum, and then on addition of the guest, there is a big change happening, which suggests some sort of reaction happening. So they took the 590 nanometer band at this point. So once again, carrying out a similar experiment as before, they once again got confirmation that there is a 2 is to 1 ratio happening, and there is a certain association constant that they found out. And once again, when they analyzed the redox properties of COQDB, they found a similar broad peak at around minus 1.08 volts, which was pretty similar to COZPB, which was assigned to CO2 CO1 reduction. It was found to be suitable for proton reduction in an aqueous medium like COZPB. And when they once again made the environment proton rich acidic, basically the current increased, once again potential became more negative, with the same suggestion that proton reduction is happening and the host is responsible for it. So once again, to confirm that fluorescein is involved in this, once again increasing the amount of the host compound decrease the fluorescence of the fluorescent guest, which implied the same thing, that a reaction is happening in which CO2 is getting reduced to CO1 to form hydrogen. And once again, the crucial part where we see the efficiency of COQDB compared to COZPB essentially. Once again, you have the components taken in acetonitrile water DMF mixture, and we use GC. And what we find is the hydrogen evolution is maximum at around the same pH, but here it's basically 10. And the turnover frequency in this case was found to be around 40, and TON was found to be 250, which in comparison to COZPB, this value was 100 and this was 400, I guess. So apparently the efficiency was found to be much lower than COZPP, which could imply that the DHPA moiety had a certain significance. And once again, here also some sort of a stoichiometric ratio was preferred between the host and the guest. So here it was 2:1, where if you have more of fluorescein, then sort of the production decreased, but if you decrease fluorescein, then the production hardly increases. So this was basically observed. And as one last check, even for COQDB, they wanted to be sure that the host guest activity is the generator of hydrogen essentially. So they took a possible inhibitor, which is an important biomolecule named glutathione. And once again, and also it was found to be recognizable by similarly structured cyclohelicates as COQDB and COZPB, so from previous work. So they used glutathione, and when they tried to insert GSH, which is glutathione, into this system containing COQDB and fluorescein in the optimal stoichiometric ratio of 2:1, once again some sort of an encapsulation is happening with GSH, between GSH and the host, as suggested by this drastically changing UVB spectrum. But it was seen that at some point the hydrogen production sort of stops completely when you are adding certain amount of GSH, which seems to imply that it's acting as an inhibitor and it's not allowing fluorescein to go into the cavity. So obviously it seems that host guest activity is actually mandatory for evolving hydrogen. So with this, we come to the end of the experimental procedures and supposed results. So basically, we saw in this paper that the authors tried to design a molecule-based system, basically, to produce energy sources like fuels, like hydrogen, almost on the idea of an artificial leaf system. And they utilized the MOF approach to simplify things, and they were able to develop two photosynthesis artificially photosynthetic systems like COZPB and COQDP. And the host guest activity was found to be very important in this, which basically validates the concept of molecular flasks. And one more important thing was that the idea of following an enzyme which does the same job was actually fruitful, because we saw the improved efficiency of COZPB compared to COQDB. So this could be a great addition, and overall the ideas seem to be pretty logical. So we hope that this talk gave you a great idea of the interplay of supramolecular chemistry, photocatalysis, and biomimetic chemistry. I basically tried to simplify and present the paper as much as I could understand it. So thank you to everyone who attended this, and we hope the first session of Valence was appreciated by you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Shefali, for that wonderful talk, and the slides were really beautifully laid out. Okay, so I will ask if anyone has any questions, they can type out in the chat box or ask them directly if like by typing question.
Hello, can I ask directly?
Yes, yes, you can.
Yes. Sefali, was the idea of molecular flask given by this group the first time, or was it like in there before also?
I have not seen this term around a lot, but yeah, this was not coined by this group. So the idea is essentially to confine things within a certain system. So that molecular flask term may be new, but the idea is old. You could have seen that in several papers, in fact.
Okay.
If people does anyone have any further questions?
Yeah, I have one. So about the metals and organic linkers supposedly coming together to form a metal organic framework, like a you told like a jigsaw puzzle. So is this entropically driven, or does entropy play any role in it?
So in general, when you consider something simple like a hydrophobic effect, if you think why oil and water don't mix, you can think that oil and water, their affinity is low. But one important consideration that we might be missing is oil molecules or organic molecules basically have several water molecules on their surface. So when they are released from the surface as the organic molecules come together to form sort of a hydrophobic core, which is essentially the hydrophobic effect, then we can imagine that the water molecules getting released into the whole solution, instead of just being restricted on the organic compound surface, could be a entropically positive thing basically. So maybe here also basically in any sort of self assembly we can often see that when certain restricted things like the water molecules which were initially restricted on the system, when the things self assemble, the water molecules could be getting released. So that may be one idea. So that's an interesting thing to consider, like what exactly is driving these self assemblies. So I don't know exactly about MOS, but I have come across by reading that self assembly is often driven by such an entropic effect, and another enthalpic effect could also be there because you are releasing water molecules and you are once again allowing them to form hydrogen bond interactions with water molecules. So that may be an answer to your question.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
So, does anyone else have any further questions? Meanwhile, I would like to ask one question of my own, that since like NADPH is a really big molecule, right? And like considering other reductants maybe. So do we need this biomimesis? I mean, we could have done with some smaller reductant maybe. I mean,
So they basically went after NADH and NADPH basically because of their association with hydrogenases. Now I don't know what other molecules are associated with these class of enzymes, but essentially many biomolecules that you see, they are large in structure with several components involved, like sugar component or phosphate link. So that's not exactly uncommon, but I guess they went after it basically not looking at the structure, just the association of the enzymes, association with enzymes and their supposedly important role, which was actually, it was said that these molecules do play an important role in mediating and making electron transfer more smooth within the enzyme. So that might have been the reason. So I don't know about the size consideration.
okay. It seems that no further questions have been asked, so I think we can close the session for today if anyone
That
else
we should
doesn't have
actually
any
tell
more questions.
that if anyone is interested to join, then please feel free to join our WhatsApp or Discord group.
Yes,
And
we have.
also we will be having further sessions. I guess after 2 weeks we will have another student within student session to familiarize ourselves with this idea of a PGC. And I guess within a month we will try to invite authors and have a proper big session with where you can ask your questions directly to authors. So we hope that will happen.
Yeah, and like we have given the Discord link in the chat box, so we will from here on we will send out a registration form to create a mailing list for Valence, and yeah, everyone is welcome to join the Discord link. Okay, thank you. I'm stopping the recording.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to Shefali for the wonderful